Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to CANTO Conversations. My name is Disha Clifford, and I'm a member of the CANTO Board of Directors, and I'm your moderator for today's session. Our topic this morning is a very important one, a Caribbean ICT Vision 2030. Think global, act regional, and serve local. And our guest speaker is someone who is eminently qualified to speak on this topic. It's Dr. Anvit Ramlakhan. Dr. Anvit Ramlakhan is a prolific, strong, inspiring, inclusive young professional leader from Suriname. He is an experienced executive with a demonstrated history of working in the telecoms industry for several years, with widespread skills in operations, quality, risk and project management, business, strategy, product portfolio management, just to name a few. Furthermore, Anvit contributes to the development of youth by lecturing and tutoring at 4 university study organizations in Suriname at undergraduate and postgraduate levels within study fields such as ICT, electrical engineering, organizational management, process management, and business intelligence. He is part of the volunteer organization known as HSS in Suriname for over 20 years, through which character molding, collaboration, and a positive way of living for the youth is created. And this year, he has been elected as chairman of the ICT Association in Suriname in order to help strategize the digital economic development of Suriname. He has also been elected as representative on the National Suriname eGov Presidential Working Group and as chairman for the Suriname Business Youth Association. An incredible bio. Thank you, Dr. Ramlakhan, for being with us this morning. Before I turn it over to you, I just want to remind our listening audience that you can post your questions in the chat, and please stay with us until the very end for a chance to win a $100 Amazon voucher. Dr. Ramlakhan.
Thank you very much, Disha, for the introduction. I would also like to thank the CANTO team and organization to make this possible. As Disha has introduced, the topic for today is an ICT Vision 2030 for the Caribbean. And the focus is thinking global, because as soon as you want to implement something, you should think what value will it bring to the world. Acting regional, what is the impact it will bring to the Caribbean region, since CANTO, their scope of working is within the Caribbean, and serving local. It doesn't matter how, or it doesn't matter where you come from, but it is very important that we try to serve the local people, the local community, and the local services thereby. So that's the reason why we are having this conversation, this presentation. I hope the part of the conversation comes after the presentation where you can ask questions and we can then go into the different questions. My name is Anvit Ramlakhan and the introduction has already been done. So taking in regards to the time schedule we have for today, I have around 30 minutes from the organization. I'll try to wrap it up in that time frame. There are a few presentation topics I would like to cover today with you, starting with the scope of ICT. What exactly does ICT currently mean to the world? The second topic, the Caribbean ICT Vision 2030. What could be the vision, the mission, and the values proposed based on the scope of the Caribbean ICT development. Point number 3 is, as soon as we have the vision, mission, and values, we could dig deeper into the roadmap. What exact targets, what exact milestones do we need to have at least in our Vision 2030 plan in order for it to be a success and for it to bring great value to the Caribbean. Point number 4 is the Vision 2030 and the collaboration or correlation with the SDGs. And point number 5 are the next steps. What could we do next? And last but not least, the question and answers in order to wrap up the discussion. Let's start with point number 1, the scope of ICT currently in the world. For those who don't know what ICT means, ICT stands for information, communication, and technology. It is just a basic tool through which information is communicated between two parties, rather being people or machines, through a given technology. That's it basic. It's like talking with machines or people making use of technology. Looking at the scope of the ICT worldwide, let's see what the current world population is, according to Worldometer, that's around 7.9 billion people currently. Looking at the total of mobile connections, that's around 10.6 billion connections, according to the GSMA, who gathers data from all operators worldwide. So what we can see is that we have more mobile connections than people living on Earth. That's very astonishing, and that directly shows the impact ICT has on the development of the world and connecting the world. And looking at the unique mobile subscribers from the 10.6 billion, that is around 5.3 billion. So there are 5.3 billion unique mobile subscribers. They are uniquely identified. Bringing this into perspective with each other, there is 10.6, looking at the 7.9, around 132 or 133% more devices compared to people. And looking at 5.3, around 2/3 of the total world population has then a mobile device. If we bring this into the perspective of the GSMA, they have a report published based on the mobile economy. The same figures you can see here also. And what do they state? They state that around 2025, there will be an exponential growth in all of these different fields. For example, the unique mobile subscribers will grow from 5.3 to 5.7 billion subscribers. The internet subscribers will also grow to 5 billion. The SIM connections will also grow to 8.8 billion and henceforth. Looking at the smartphones, there is also a prospected exponential growth in the smartphones connections. For example, in 2021, the smartphones connection was around 75%. It is prospected to be 84% in 2025. Looking at the operator revenue and the investments thereby, it will grow from $1.08 trillion to $1.16 trillion. The same for the GDP contribution and the employment ratios. So the message I'm trying to send here is that ICT has to do with the development of the world, either way or another. If you have more connections than people living, then that's the way to go for the business. That's the way to go for development. If we also look at the industrial revolutions, Industrial Revolution 4.0 states that ICT will be one of the key, or not maybe one, but the most important key factor for Industrial Revolution 4.0 to be effective and to manifest itself into the world. Let's look at some other facts from a publication from the IDB. What did they do? They investigated this around an IMF research done around 2019, the end of 2019, by these people. And what did they say? They said, if we compare the ratio of investment into ICT compared to the turnover it will generate for these Caribbean countries, we can see that for all Caribbean countries listed here, that the cost of closing the digital infrastructure gap, the cost of investment compared to the impact of the investment coming back from that investment, those are the gray figures here, it will be exponentially. For instance, in Barbados, around 0.2% if that is invested into the GDP for the digital divide gap, infrastructure gap, the impact will be 58 times the initial investment. So that accounts for most of the Caribbean countries. From this, we then can conclude if the government and other private companies tend to invest into ICT, tend to invest into digital infrastructure and digitalization, they will get a very much higher return on investment. Looking at how we stand as Caribbean countries compared to the world, and that has been wrapped up in a report from the IDB, where they have defined a broadband development index. Okay, there are different categories for evaluation to see on what level a certain country is for their development of broadband services. The lead countries are given here, so those are the highest scorers on a scale to 10. And then we have the Caribbean countries listed here. And what do we see? And the green and red values are given here in the note. The green indicate an improvement of the ranking between 2018 and 2020. And the red indicates a lower ranking between 2018 and 2020. And this research has been done in 2021. So what do we see? Most of the Caribbean countries, we are in the average middle field, okay? And the leading countries are on the higher scale, that makes sense, but there is room for improvement. If we look at the overall score, you see most of the Caribbean countries, they have a green value. If we would add up all the green values, you see that there is some progress, but nothing will be better when there is a planned, strategical, structured approach to gain this process and gain traction through a Vision 2030 plan. That moves on to the second subject for today, which is the Caribbean ICT Vision 2030 itself. Any vision should have a vision statement because that gives the value proposition which such a vision will bring into practice. This is a vision which is derived from the current Vision 2030 plan for Suriname. And what do we see? The statement is around the same, which states as follows: a digitally enabled information society which is empowered by the interconnected world, because you want to think globally, whereby innovation, information and communication technologies, so the use of ICT, enables and accelerates all these different aspects: social, political, environmental, economic, and sustainable growth with inclusive development for and by every Caribbean. We can divide this into three sections. The section number one, the part of information society and empowered by the interconnected world, is the what question of the vision statement. The how question is based on using ICT in order to enable and accelerate social, political, environmental, and economical development. And the why part is very important because we want to have sustainable growth and inclusive development for and by every Caribbean. Looking at the mission statement, this is around more or less the same as the vision statement, but the focus here is on development, facilitating, and fostering affordability, making it affordable, and making it universally accessible. It doesn't matter from where you come, it doesn't matter what your pay slip is. What important is that it is universally accessible. And the other parts are the same. The how part, ICT, all these different fields, and the why part is still the same: sustainability and inclusiveness for the growth and development of the Caribbean region and its countries and its people. So this is then the mission statement. Moving forward, what could be the Vision 2030's 7 core values, the strategical core values? These are as follows. Point number 1, efficiency. Anything which is done is based on targets with specific deadlines, with specific ownerships per country in order to guarantee a successful implementation. Transparency and accountability. It is very important that everyone knows their responsibility so that the accountability for implementation is transparently shared with all stakeholders. That brings us to the next one, openness. Everything should be published. As soon as we talk about transparency and openness and equity, everything should be published with, for example, yearly reports to state what the progress has been towards an ICT Vision 2030. Neutrality says what it needs to say. There is no difference making in your background or in a country's current circumstances in order for it to move forward. Making it people-centered. It's all about the people. The vision and the mission statement also indicated that it is very important that it is something which creates value, which creates growth, sustainable growth, and which creates inclusive development of all Caribbean people regarding their own countries. It should be service-oriented because at the end of the day, everything needs to be business profitable as well, not only for the government, but also for the private companies. So there should be some value for commercialization through the digital projects. And the last one, it should be results-based. It shouldn't be only a plan which is beautiful in words, but it should be a plan which creates a short, in terms of inspiration, making it challenging and making it based on results. If we look at the strategic goals, which are derived from the strategic mission and the strategic vision, these are the 5 strategic goals, starting with innovation. It is very important that we enable digital information in the telecom sector in order to support the transformation and development of the Caribbean society. The second goal is inclusiveness. It is also very important that we include all the relevant stakeholders in order to bridge the digital divide gap, in order to provide broadband access. We've already seen the digital divide score, where we see that the Caribbean countries are on the lower and the mid-range of scoring. So inclusiveness is very important. If we don't collaborate together, there will be no progress made. Third one is growth, in order to develop, enable, and foster access and increased use of ICT through the digital economy and the societies thereby. Goal number 4 is continuity and sustainability, especially focusing on the SDGs, because the SDGs also have a very insightful target and goals specification. Hereby, it is important that we manage emerging unknown risks, look at the potential challenges, exploiting the opportunities which will result in the rapid growth of ICT. And last but not least, what I already indicated, is very important that we collaborate with each other. That's the only way we can grow as Caribbean countries together, by strengthening the cooperation and the collaboration among the Caribbean countries and stakeholders for the Vision 2030. These are the 5 goals. For each of these 5 goals, I have proposed some targets through which we can guarantee that these goals are achieved. And if we achieve these goals, then we will achieve the mission and the vision for the intended ICT Vision 2030 for the Caribbean. Looking at the roadmap, in the roadmap, for each goal, a specific set of targets have been derived. Let's start with goal number 1, which is the innovation goal. Target 1.1, which states by 2022, at least 50 strategical areas in the Caribbean countries should have safe city services. Target 1.2 is the implementation of cloud services, especially an e-gov cloud grid, for at least 80% of all governing ministries. And you will then later understand why these targets have been stated in this manner, so that the full digitalization maturity is achieved at the end of 2030. Target 1.3 states that we implement at least quadruple or triple K services for the people in the Caribbean, with engagement for at least 30% of the population. Target 1.4 states the implementation, what you already know, of e-payment services for at least a penetration of 30% using these services. Target 1.5 is the implementation, what we already have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, is having a fully digitalized e-health service process for the hospitals and every other organization which has anything to do with health services for at least 60%. Target 1.6 by 2023, implementation of e-education services. This was also a very big challenge for the normal government schools in the Caribbean countries to come with a sound ICT solution for the students to follow their lessons online. Yeah, for at least 80% of all educational institutions. Target 1.7, and we are then moving forward towards 2030 now. By 2024, implementation of e-transport services. We all know the challenge that oil is becoming more and more expensive due to its scarcity. and with a ratio of at least 60% of licensed public and private transport services. Target 1.6, by 2025, it is recommended that we also implement e-government services for at least 80% of all community services. And target 1.8 is dependent on target 1.2. So we should start in 2022 with using cloud services for eGov, building the eGov cloud. And by 2025, we should be ready to use the cloud as a backbone for the government services. Very simple digitalization projects. Target 1.9, by 2027, it is also something which brings into perspective the implementation of the fourth industrial revolution, bringing augmented reality, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and Internet of Everything services into practice for the different sectors. And the sectors are given here: safety, government, the financial sector, the health sector, the education sector, and the transport sector. One sector which is also very relevant for Guyana and Suriname is the oil and gas sector, for example. The last one, target 1.10, by 2030, we should be ready to be implementing fully the fourth industrial revolution. And then we're talking about solutions such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics implemented into the services of the Caribbean. These are the 10 targets in order for the first goal, which is innovation, to be implemented based on the Caribbean ICT Vision 2030. Moving forward to goal number 2, which is inclusiveness. Target 2.1, by 2022, it is very important that in order for ICT to be inclusive for all people in the respective Caribbean countries, that it should be affordable. It should be accessible through any location they are. And the affordability should not be higher than 50% of the average monthly income. By 2023, gender equality in internet usage and mobile phone ownership should be proactive campaigning and direct marketing. So there should be no distinguishment made between men or women by using technology or by employment also in the ICT sector. It is also one of the SDGs. Target 2.3 is by 2024, we should enable environments using accessible ICT for people with disabilities, making them also part of the ICT development we are planning to implement. Target 2.4, by 2025, at least 80% of the households in the populated districts of the Caribbean countries, they should at least have mobile internet access, internet broadband services in this case, and 60% in rural areas. And by 2030, these figures, the 80% should grow to 95%, and the 60% should grow to 75% of populated and rural areas respectively in the Caribbean. That's goal number 2 for inclusiveness and the respective targets given thereby. Moving forward to goal number 3, which is growth. How do we grow? We grow through these 4 specific targets. Target 3.1 is to have at least 60% of the total population with a minimum broadband bandwidth of 10 Mbps, where 50% of the population uses the internet on a daily basis. Looking at target 3.2, by 2025, the same figure here, but with a growth from 60 to 70%, with the exponential growth from 10 to 100 Mbps, and with the growth from 50 populated penetration to 60%. Target 3.3 is the same target as target 3.1 and 3.2, but here the ratio of growth is from 70 to 85, from 100 M to 1 gig, because then by 2030, 1 gig will just be a commodity service, because the connection speed won't matter. Eventually in telecom development, it will be the services you can exploit using the connectivity, and the population connectivity should be from 60 to 70%. And target 3.4 is that the e-services which have been illustrated in goal number 1 70% of the population should be making use of those innovative e-services, not as a luxury, but as basic needs for these different sectors, which have already been highlighted in the previous slides. Moving forward to goal number 4, which stands for continuity and sustainability. By 2022, at least have a compiled ICT Vision 2030 strategy based on these specifics. Target 4.2 is having attention given to cybersecurity policy, taking into regards the privacy of the GDPR, for example, how we can implement that in the Caribbean areas, focusing still on digital development and growth, and taking into consideration international policy and governance frameworks. Target 4.3 by 2023, compilation of regulation and legislation ethics and policies of ICT law, strategy, process, service levels, etc., etc. By 2024, it is important that we improve the cybersecurity preparedness in the Caribbean, with key capabilities such as presence of a strategic plan, that there is a strategy towards we work together, the National Computer Incident and Emergency Response Team, which is incorporated through the use of ICT. Target 4.5 by 2025, compilation of National Emergency Telecommunication Plan, which is part of the National Emergency Plan for national and local disaster risk reduction strategies. And target 4.6 by 2030, evaluation of the Vision 2030 strategic framework and consolidation, and working towards an ICT Vision 2050. So it is very important that we include continuous evaluation and accountability for these specific provided and proposed targets. Going to the last goal, which is goal number 5, collaboration. Target 5.1 is increased effective partnerships with stakeholders and cooperation with other organizations and entities affiliated with the ICT sector, locally and abroad. Target 5.2, stakeholders engagement and implementation for the given Caribbean stakeholders. And then we're talking about the regulators, the providers, the governments, the legislators, etc., etc. Target 5.3 is provide an overview and for sure raise awareness and secure available development funds for the Vision 2030, because it shouldn't be a plan which has no financial funding and backing from its respective government or private companies in order to process secured loans for non-banks and crowdfunding. Target 5.4 is a focused collaboration with government ministries for implementation of the e-services given in goal number 1. So these are the 5 strategic goals with respective targets in order to move forward. This is a high-level overview for everything I have just presented. We have the vision statement, the mission statement, the strategic values, the strategic goals with the specific initiatives per strategic goal through the different targets with the corresponding timeline. This is the strategic house for the proposed strategic house for the strategic Vision 2030 for the Caribbean region. Moving forward, point number 4 is looking at Vision 2030 and the SDGs. And it is very important that we don't forget the SDGs, and through implementation of the Vision 2030, there are some high correlations. For example, quality education, good health and well-being, infrastructure innovation and the industrial revolution, gender equity, sustainable offices and community, and affordability and clean energy. All of these SDGs targets have been incorporated in the target list for the Vision 2030. Moving forward, what should be the next steps? I have given an overview of the importance of ICT worldwide, because we have more mobile connections than people living on Earth. The same accounts for the Caribbean countries. So ICT is the way to go for the fourth industrial revolution, for the development of any country in the Caribbean, and for using it as creating value for the people living in the Caribbean. I have given an overview of what could be the strategic Vision 2030 plan with specific targets. So the next step should be, do we use this as a guideline? Do we, as for example, CANTO, take the initiative, take the leadership, and take the accountability and ownership to state that we will come with a Vision 2030 for the Caribbean countries in order to guarantee that there is a collaborated vision towards, we are working towards 2030, in order to guarantee that the development will improve compared to what I have just illustrated at the beginning of the presentation. That is the short presentation about Vision 2030. I would thank you for your attention and your attendance. Once again, thank you for CANTO and the organizing team for making this possible. I would like to end with a quote: "Vision without execution is lame." It is very important that if you execute anything, that there should be a vision. But if you have an excellent dream, but if you don't execute, then you're just lame. You're just sitting and standing still. And the second part, execution without vision is blind. You could keep executing, you could run very fast, but if you don't have a vision, then you're moving in all different directions. So that's the reason why the Vision 2030 for the Caribbean is something we should really think about, we should adapt into, and we should give it attention for it to be a success for the development of the Caribbean countries and the growth of their people. That is the presentation. I would like to thank you once again for your attendance. I am giving back to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Ramlakhan. And those are powerful words, industry agnostic advice, I suppose, topic agnostic advice, even very powerful words. And it's been very insightful, and I can tell because the chat is actually blowing up. We have a bunch of questions for you. So the first one is, how can we make our ICT more operational and efficient?
Yes, thank you for the question. If we want to make ICT more efficient and making it more usable for our people, then we should implement the Vision 2030 plan. We should at least start planning, because if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. That's a quote we all know. So it is important that there is some kind of long-term vision, what ICT will bring to the table. If we don't have that, if what we currently don't have, we don't have a Vision 2030 plan for the Caribbean, then we don't know towards what we are working. When you're small, you're thinking about becoming a doctor or a pilot or an officer, then you have a life target and you're working towards that. So that's the way we can use make use of ICT for all the things we do in our life, not only using technology, but all other sectors, including that. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
I think it did, yes. I think our audience member who asked should be happy with that. If not, we can have an additional post for clarification. I have another question here for you. How can Caribbean countries align digital transformation with all stakeholders? That's a big one.
Yes. So in goal number, let me put that on the screen. In goal number 5, collaboration has been highlighted. So the Vision 2030 plan will not be a plan for only one Caribbean country, but all Caribbean stakeholders. They need to collaborate. They need to see what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are the opportunities, what are the threats. What should be our value proposition working towards 2030. That's the only way that stakeholder engagement and stakeholder influence and stakeholder interests are also incorporated in the strategic plan. I hope that that answers the question. Yes, so through the implementation of Vision 2030, you will then align their input as well.
Okay. We have another one specific to Suriname. Can you give us an idea of where Suriname is in its digital transformation initiatives?
Yes, sure. Suriname has been very active in looking at the long term. So in Suriname, we have had a presentation, I think the previous year, 2021, where we have presented the Vision 2030, ICT Vision 2030 to the president of Suriname, and he has given his full approval and commitment for it to be a success and for it to be implemented and incorporated in the long-term development plan of Suriname. So that's the way we have also tried to get the government conscious of the impact ICT will bring to Suriname. And on the other side, we have Telesur, we have Digicel. Telesur has been implementing the top rack of technologies. Digicel is also following. So it is very much going on the right way. But again, we need to have a long-term plan, a long-term vision to see how we can exploit the use of ICT in Suriname.
So for the question also asked about engagement of the private sector towards achieving these objectives. Is there anything specific to that you can speak to?
Yes, sure. So the private sector is also a sector which is very important, and looking at the impact COVID-19 has brought into Suriname, as well as the economical challenges we are currently having, then the private sector is for sure looking at cost-efficient ICT sound solutions. And that's where the story of DataSure comes in. I'm the CEO of DataSure, also representing DataSure today. DataSure is especially focused on the private sector to enable them to digitalize through a small CAPEX and a small OPEX revenue model. So we have been incorporated, for example, the financial institutions, the financial banks in Suriname to come to DataSure, and for a very cheap price, they can implement anything which is ICT driven in their company. The same we will be doing for the other sectors, for it to make the use of ICT cheap, affordable, and making it high quality. That's how we have incorporated the private sector in Suriname for the different fields.
Thank you. So Suriname, can you give us an idea of how the launch of 5G in Suriname has benefited the country? Are you seeing this benefiting SMEs and citizens?
Yes. 5G is a technology which will bring very high speeds to the table. And what I had said during the presentation, eventually speed will become a commodity. You won't need to do a speed test because you will be guaranteed I will be getting, for example, 1 gig of download on my mobile phone. I won't need to be bothering when watching a HD video on Netflix or on YouTube that it will be buffering, which is the case for some connections in the Caribbean as of now. So 5G for sure has brought development into Suriname. And for now, it is focused on SMEs indeed, and all other institutions who want to have a point-to-point 5G connectivity with guaranteed high-speed internet access. So on the longer time scale, it will also be accessible to nationwide people access. But for now, it is accessible to the phones who can use 5G. And in Paramaribo, all people who have 5G phone, they can make use of these services. So for sure, 5G has brought a profitable investment for Telesur as well as for the community in Suriname for using high-speed internet.
Okay, thank you. We have a comment and a question here. Sometimes action from governments is needed in order to move forward. That action is usually slow or absent. How do you move this along in Suriname?
Yes, so I wouldn't put the government in the chair of they aren't doing their job well. I think they just need to be informed. They just need to know what the impact will be, the return on investment and the return on efforts made from their side, and the value it will bring towards the people of the respective countries. And this is exactly the winning formula. As soon as you have something written down, as soon as you have a long-term plan which speaks that it will be profitable and it will engage people and it will develop your own people and it will create value. So if these are the benefits we can get from a Vision 2030 plan, then this is your card which you should play with the government to tell them this is something they need to look into.
Okay. With reference to Goal 3, you identified several targets, for example, 60% by 2022. Where are we now? What is the current position?
Okay, I can speak for Suriname because I know the data by head. Suriname is for sure already, they have already surpassed target 3.1, for example, providing 10 Mbps minimal bandwidth access. I think the average should be around 30 or 40 Mbps through broadband fixed access, and through mobile access, they have 4G and 5G. The same for Digicel, they have 4G. So everyone in Suriname at least has a better internet connection compared to the time before it. And the time before that, it should be around 2018, 2017. But for sure, there could be some incidents where people don't have the required internet access in the rural areas. But I think the operators are aware of that, and they are doing the relevant investments also for making it nationally wide accessible based on the speeds given there. I could also, there was a link of GSMA. The people can also use that link, person that asked this question, to see what the current average is of that specific region or country.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's another one. How do you iterate for disruptions?
Can you repeat it? How do you
iterate for disruptions?
Yes, so this is part of goal number 5, where it is important, or is it goal number 4? Let me check. Yeah, goal number 4. In goal number 4, as soon as you do innovation, that will be an iterative process. You will do trial and error, and you will see what fits the best purpose and the requirements in that context. But for disruptions, it is very important that there is a risk assessment done, that there are SWOT implementations done in order to get into field, get into perspective, what could be the potential disruptions. And based on that, you can then come with target 4.5, for example, incorporating it into the national telecom emergency plan, or incorporating goal 4.2 cybersecurity policy, because cybersecurity is one disruption who could ruin this whole plan, for example. So bringing it into perspective and using these targets for it to be non-disrupting for the future.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. What is the current status of implementation of ICT Vision 2030 in Suriname? And I know you spoke that in respect of a previous question, which was really in reference to goal 3. So I suppose the ask here is more of a general global nature. What is the current status of implementation of ICT Vision 2030 in Suriname?
Yes, the current status is that I'm also chairman of the ICT Association, so I am in the forefront to make this plan successful. So we have a specific strategic commission who has this plan with all targets. We are busy with the government to come with a task force for the installation of the task force in order to have the regular interaction with all stakeholders for the plan to be successful. For at least 2021, we have achieved all the targets which were needed to be achieved, and the same will be done for 2022. At the end of the year, we will evaluate it and see what progress has been made. So the plan is in phase of implementation as we are speaking now.
Okay, excellent. Another question. What suggestions would you offer for getting rural communities connected in a manner that does not disenfranchise the operators in terms of return on investment, as well as the cost of service for rural citizens? That's a good question.
Yes, that's basically a challenge through which operators have their ROE calculations done, and the business plan indicates the cost of ownership is higher than the profits which could be retrieved from such technologies. But there are always fixes based on the circumstances of such a rural area. Okay, we have, for example, Mr. Elon Musk, which is coming with the low orbit internet access, and I don't know by what time frame that would be accessible in the Caribbean countries, but that could be an alternative for these operators to have low orbit internet access for the people in the rural areas if the return on investment is very much negative for these areas. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to come up with internet points and then it will be a specific area through which people can get access to the internet. If we recall, usually, I think 20 years ago, we didn't have internet at home. So we needed to go to a cyber where there was internet and you could use the internet there. So that's one cheap way to have internet points where internet is accessible for these people. They can go to that place, they can use it, and they can go back home. So those are innovative, creative, small, cheap solutions through which they can include and incorporate people from the rural areas in being connected to the internet.
Nice. We have a request. I think this is a follow-up to the question that you answered with respect to goal 3. And I think you gave a reference to where that poster would find information on other countries in the Caribbean. Could you just repeat where we'd be able to find that?
Yeah, sure. It is the GSMA link. So after this, I think the presentation will be shared. The third link here, or the second link here, you can go on the GSMA website and then you can see what the penetration is of mobile connectivity, the average speeds, etc., etc. You need to go to the GSMA intelligence part for this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Dr. Ramakan, you're a lecturer, you have students. If we were your students, what's the report card you would give to the region? How are we tracking? How are we performing in terms of our march towards these 2030 goals?
Yeah, if we look at not what I would give as a report card figure, but what IDB has given us, it has been an average score, and on the lower hand, the developments aren't going swiftly as we need them to be going. So the figures state here for themselves. Not any Caribbean country is within the top 20. Some cases there are incidents, but looking at an overall development, we are going a bit behind phase. So it is very important that some are going before and they are not lagging, but they are preceding, and some are lagging in the development. So it's very important that we come together, evaluate, learn from each other, share with each other, because that's the rationale for such a Vision 2030. We share with each other, eventually share resources if that is profitable and sustainable, through which we then can move forward. So for now, it's not something I would give a good mark on.
So even if we look at that figure, I think what's most telling there is the strategic regulation figures. I think I see just at a glance there the most red in that column, because one of the questions we have here is what is the importance of regulation or the legislative and regulatory framework in terms of achieving these goals. So is it fair to say that that's of critical importance and we seem to be lagging behind in that arena? Have you any comment on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Regulation and legislation and policies and governance frameworks are all important parts and parcel of any strategic plan for it to sustain. They are like the pillars that keep the strategic plan into place. So all these things we have just mentioned are very important also to be taken care of.
Okay. Here's another question. Where do you see the Caribbean in the next 5 years?
I can't look into the future, but what we have tried to do is at least have a detailed approach for what could be the future. And these are some targets through which we can then work towards implementation of ICT in the Caribbean and working towards a more inspiring future of Caribbean countries.
What about CANTO's role? What do you think what do you think CANTO's role could potentially be in terms of supporting our membership and countries towards achieving these goals? Yeah,
that was also the message I try to convey during the next steps, is that CANTO takes ownership of at least its member states or its member individuals to come together to see if this is really something which is applicable to the Caribbean, and that they take the ownership and state that we as CANTO, we are coming with the Vision 2030 development ICT plan. If you want to, you can use it. If you don't want to, you don't need to use it. But this is what we at least recommend for your country to develop ICT in the coming years? Because it's part of the core of CANTO and what CANTO tends to create for the Caribbean, and they have been doing that. And there's no better way to put it into perspective and put it on paper, put it in targets through which everyone knows what needs to be done.
Agreed. And I guess that takes us right back to the quotation you closed your presentation with, and how important it is to focus on the vision that we're trying to achieve. Thank you, Dr. Amakan. I think this was a very insightful presentation. I'm very pleased with the engagement on the chat. I mean, clearly it's a factor of how interesting your slides were and how interesting the content was that you presented. So sincere thanks from all of us at CANTO for being with us.